In an era defined by rapid change and burgeoning modernity, one man stood as a beacon of strength, courage, and indomitable spirit. Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States, exemplified the virtues of masculinity in its most honorable form. His multifaceted legacy encompasses not just political achievements, but is a personal narrative that inspires generations to come. Roosevelt's story is one of resilience, conviction, and a relentless pursuit of greatness. His life, marked by physical hardship, adventurous exploits, robust leadership, and unwavering dedication to principle, provides a timeless exemplar for what it means to truly be masculine. Masculinity is one of those things our society finds difficult to define and understand. Some say it is merely a social construct, while others say it is an inexorable part of our DNA, and the ways it manifests in society is merely society acknowledging what is already latently there. For this video, I will define it as those virtues which are most ubiquitous and natural among men. Note I use the word ubiquitous and not universal. Ubiquitous indicates something that is widely present or prevalent across various places or contexts, while universal describes something that applies uniformly to all instances within a specific scope or category. Most societies have demanded a higher quantity of certain things from their men when compared to their women, and in the reverse, certain things have been demanded of women to a higher quantity than they were demanded of men. So I'll be looking at those things that are most ubiquitous and natural to men. And by natural, I mean it in the classical teleological sense. The classic understanding of nature didn't merely mean a snapshot of all the green stuff outside of your window. Preserving the trees and endangered animals doesn't paint a complete picture of nature, although Roosevelt was an advocate for that, which we will get into. When I say nature, I mean it in an Aristotelian sense of what a thing is seeking to fulfill when properly functioning. For instance, an acorn's natural purpose is to become an oak tree. Living organisms are understood to have built-in goals or ends, mainly its own survival and reproduction, all of which is ultimately in pursuit of what is flourishing as it aligns with the proper cosmic order. To go against this is to rebel against nature itself. And a fight against nature is not a battle you can win. It leads to disarray and despair. That's why going without things like a social network leads to despondency. Man is a social animal. No man is an island. You can't ignore your natural design and expect things to work without losing something in its stead. Aristotle believed understanding an object's nature involves understanding its purpose and function. This is known as the final cause of a thing, the last of his four causes which explain why a thing is the way it is. So given this precedent, what does nature demand of men in order to have them live the way that they were supposed to have them survive, reproduce, and flourish maximally? That's the understanding of masculinity we will be using. It's not just recognizing your manly gifts, it's using them for good, using them to contribute to the natural continuance and flourishing of the human species. Under this view, there are things that are of proportionate demand of men and women. Things like kindness and humility. Of those things necessary for both masculinity and femininity, I will focus on the specific way it is reflected in a man. Men and women will, on average, express the same virtues in slightly different ways. Masculinity and femininity are like two different instruments playing the same note. Even if they do the same thing, they end up sounding slightly different. There is a pure light of virtue that enters the prism of human flourishing. Masculinity and femininity will refract that light in different yet all the more beautiful colors because of their difference. I'm a man, so I'll be explaining things from my own point of view. So without any further ado, this is how Theodore Roosevelt is the pinnacle of masculinity. Note: one more thing before we get started. I will try not to voice my opinion on the specific policies he advocated, as that's beyond the scope and, frankly, the necessity of this video. This is an examination of his character. That being said, some ostensible or legitimate approval or disapproval of his body of work will be necessary to capture a complete understanding of his character. I just want to emphasize that his character will be the main concern of this video, not his policy. All political examinations will be in service to illuminating his character. If you want to talk about his policies in the comments below, go ahead. Dominance and gentleness. Theodore Roosevelt practiced what the Greeks called praus. It is having the feral ferocity capable of overwhelming anyone, yet possessing the self-control to refrain from using it unless absolutely necessary. It is feeling the passions of emotions and yielding them to the powers of the mind. It is harnessing the energy we get from our emotions and conforming it to the good of our higher reason. Aristotle said, "We praise a man who feels anger on the right grounds and against the right persons, and also in the right manner and at the right moment and for the right length of time." In some translations, it specifically says a meek or praus person acts this way. In his Man in the Arena speech, Theodore Roosevelt echoed a similar idea. He said, "We do not admire the man of timid peace. We admire the man who embodies victorious effort, the man who never wrongs his neighbor, who is prompt to help a friend, but who has those virile qualities necessary to win in the stern strife of actual life." He believed that kindness, while inseparably important to the good of man, didn't count for much unless you had the actual strength to hurt someone. He strongly believed that it is in your ability to properly control your strength that it truly has substance. Similar to praus. Although Roosevelt doesn't specifically talk about emotional control, it's a necessary and closely connected requirement. There was a time when machoism and bravado were emphasized too much in society, but nowadays, I believe the pendulum has switched in the other direction too far. In today's day and age, people constantly undervalue the importance of wielding power. Social power, yes, but especially physical power, especially in regards to masculinity. But make no mistake, physical strength and the ability to use it are of perennial import. It gives you power, and if you have the self-control necessary to not be corrupt by it, you will be a greater force for good than you would have been without it. Praus and Roosevelt illuminate the importance of this idea. Power is an immutable, amorphous force within the cosmic nature of the universe. It doesn't just disappear because some people demonize it. It's only transferred. Do you believe society is better off if its power is in the hands of good people? Or at least those aiming towards the good? Or bad people? I think the answer is obvious. Work where you can to seize it for yourself and use it for good. Power and strength can actually be good insofar as they're accompanied with the higher virtues of humility, patience, and modesty. Power is an amplifier. It amplifies where you are already spiritually inclined. If you are inclined to the good, you have the potential to do even more good. If you are inclined to the bad, you have the potential to do more bad. But if your good isn't good enough, the added pressure of power will change your spiritual inclination away from the good and towards the bad. The more power one has, the greater character one needs to not be overtaken by its tempting malevolence. Thus, to wield power requires not merely a robust spirituality, but a true incorruptibility of the soul. Physicality is not just a representative of physical capability, but from a cursory, surface-level glance, can often imply moral inclination. A strong, healthy, and physically attractive individual is more charismatic than one who is not. The implicit belief is that since they know how to keep themselves well tended, they, in all likelihood, know how to keep other things well tended. Roosevelt was often criticized for being too bloodthirsty and gung-ho. The author Mark Twain criticized him for this reason. And there is a grain of truth to Twain's assertions. As we'll get to later, the president kind of had an irrational love for battle. He ceaselessly praised the joys of righteous killing, even saying, "A just war is, in the long run, far better for a man's soul than the most prosperous peace." Yet the pugnacious president's 2 terms in office were almost completely tranquil. If he had not inherited the insurrection in the Philippines from William Kinsley, he could absolve himself of all military deaths. Roosevelt was hailed around the world as a flawless diplomat, the man who had done more to advance the cause of peace than any other. In his time, if all Eastern Asia, and for that matter, most of Western Europe is not embroiled in conflict, it is largely due to his delicately mediated peace settlements. At the same time, he has managed, without so much as the firing of one American pistol, to elevate his country to the giddy heights of world power. Theodore never fails to remind people of his aphorism, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." While often ascribed to him, Roosevelt cites it as a West African proverb. He ardently adopts this maxim, deeming it the quintessential strategy for both domestic and global affairs. Choosing peace while having the capacity to overwhelm is his way of handling disputes. Having the sword and letting your opponent see it slightly unsheathed is the most effective means of persuasion. It is in the availability of raw power, not necessarily the use of it, that makes for effective diplomacy. To be prepared for war and to use that preparedness to avoid actual conflict is the most effective way to promote peace. Paradoxically, if the tension of conflict makes you uncomfortable, preparing for it is the best way to avoid it entirely. Roosevelt believed that there are higher things in this life than the soft and easy enjoyment of material comfort. It is through strife, and the readiness of strife, that a nation must win greatness. A summer's rebellion in Cuba, which left the island leaderless, provided Roosevelt with the perfect chance to exemplify this. Acting as usual with lightning swiftness, he invoked an almost forgotten security agreement and proclaimed a US-backed provisional government within 24 hours of the collapse. While Secretary of War William H. Taft worked to restore order and peace and public confidence, American warships steamed thoughtfully up and down the Cuban coastline. The rebels disbanded, Taft returned to Washington, and the big white ships followed. The bad actors running the island were intimidated by this exercise of power. Cuba is now assured of regaining her independence, and the big stick had been laid down unbloodied, with Roosevelt's philosophy vindicated. This event also illustrated how Roosevelt was not avaricious for power beyond what was his rightful due. The event presented him with a golden opportunity to augment his authority, yet he declined. He said this on the matter: "I have about as much desire to annex more islands as a boa constrictor has to swallow a porcupine." Being the youngest and most vigorous man to ever enter the White House, he exalts what the New York Tribune calls an opulent efficiency of mind and body. Theodore loves power, loves publicity for the added power it brings, and proves the Actonian theory of corruption, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, to not be an ironclad rule. Curiously, during his presidency, the more power Roosevelt acquired, the calmer and sweeter he became, and the more willing he was to step down. Theodore sported the nickname Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy conjures the imagery of a soft toy animal. Theodore was given this nickname because of an incident that occurred during a bear hunting trip in 1902. While on the trip, Roosevelt refused to shoot a bear that had been tied to a tree, considering it unsportsmanlike. Roosevelt hated the idea of using animals for anything other than something in service to food or companionship. Gratuitous animal suffering through competition or game was considered swinish and indignant to him. As the story circulated, headlines began to call the story Teddy's Bear, and that's why every cute stuffed animal is referred to as a teddy bear to this day. Theodore was a man of both rugged conviction and of compassion for mankind, animals, and nature. He was also big into preserving wildlife and nature in general. He had an encyclopedic knowledge, and more importantly interest in wildlife, which further cements his sentimentality. Another story of his gentleness comes in February 1886. The story begins when Roosevelt's boat was stolen by 3 outlaws. He could have just let them go, fearing for his own safety, but Roosevelt was too upset to not enact justice. He builds a makeshift boat, and sets off down the frozen Little Missouri River to track down the thieves. After several days, and covering nearly 40 miles, Roosevelt caught up to the thieves. Despite the difficulties and danger involved, Roosevelt managed to capture the three men without any bloodshed. The river became too frozen to continue sailing, so he marched the thieves on foot, alone, for 40 hours straight, keeping himself awake as the criminals slept by reading Tolstoy. Given the fact that he was in the middle of nowhere, with criminals who would, if given the chance, kill him in a moment's notice, he was within every right to execute them and save time, energy, and peace of mind. Something the vast majority of people probably would have done. But Roosevelt felt as though they still deserved a fair trial. Because of this honorable act, one of the criminals from the prison cell thanked him and called him a sentinel of justice. And as a bonus fact, Theodore played a crucial role in reducing the violence in American football. So much so that he actually saved lives. At the time, it was common for a dozen or so people to die every year playing the sport. After his legislation, people stopped dying, all the while retaining the necessary aggression concomitant to the sport. If you're more interested in the idea of dominance and gentleness, I talk about it a bit more in my Vinland Saga video. Humility and courage. When discussing a railroad bill, he went against his Republican allies. The bill would reduce railroad transportation costs from 10 cents to 5. Both his friends and foes disparaged his opinion, opting to keep the costs at 10 cents because it made far too much money. Money which the railroad magnate Jay Gould could conceal with tax evasion. Teddy was invective in his criticism, calling it a protection of wealthy criminals. However, he soon came to realize that the bill wasn't as scrupulously debated and considered as it ought to have been. So he decided to hold off on his impassioned and unpopular opinion, to his colleagues' relief. When explaining his reconsidered opinion, he admitted to succumbing to the populist pressure and the vindictive feelings he had towards the railroad's corrupt management. But now he prioritized the importance of doing what's right over yielding to public demands. He ultimately stated that the bill was unconstitutional and that he would rather leave politics knowing that he had done what was right than to kowtow to men. He wanted the assurance of knowing in his heart that he had acted the way he ought to have. You can have your opinion on whether this is actually the right decision or not. I personally think two noble people could have differing opinions on the situation, but my point still stands. The courage to stand up for what you think is right against the approval of your colleagues, and the humility to admit that you were wrong and change your mind, are essential tenets of what it means to be the ideal man. Another example of Roosevelt's courage is in his audacious forays into grizzly bear hunting. If you know anything about hunting, you would know that grizzly bears are some of the toughest animals out there. Native Americans state, in the presence of a grizzly bear, one must show respect and humility. The bear's strength is a reminder of the power of nature and the respect we must hold for all living things. It helps them keep perspective and understand where they fit in the spectrum of life. To capture a grizzly bear was an honor deemed almost impossible. Such a feat was a testament to a hunter's extraordinary courage, strength, and skill, marking him as a figure of great respect and admiration among his people. In the 19th century, they used to hold animal fighting competitions, and it got boring for everyone because everyone who watched it knew the grizzly would just dominate. That being said, Roosevelt remained undeterred by these formidable creatures. He regularly hunted these beasts and decorated his house with them. On some occasions, as chronicled in his biographies, he had direct and personal encounters with them, and still came out alive. He had an intrepid spirit and unyielding resolve in the face of nature's most menacing perils. Another example is in how he got into a brawl in Montana, where his opponent had a gun, and somehow Mr. Roosevelt came out on top. In February 1884, Roosevelt faced a devastating personal tragedy when his mother, Mittie, and his first wife, Alice, died on the same day. Utterly enveloped by profound grief, he sought solace in the untamed expanses of the rugged American West. As he soldiered his way to Montana, a local bully and gunslinger who had a reputation for causing trouble entered the saloon where Roosevelt was staying. The man, likely intoxicated, began to harass and insult Roosevelt, calling him Four Eyes due to his now iconic spectacles. Roosevelt calmly asked the man to stop, but the bully continued his taunts and eventually drew his gun, threatening Roosevelt. In an astonishing display of alacritous speed and bullish strength, Roosevelt struck the man in the jaw, causing him to drop his gun. Roosevelt continued to pummel, subdue, and disarm the bully with relentless vigor until he was thoroughly neutralized. Theodore conducted himself not only with courage, but with poise and stoicism. Where most men would hesitate, he was focused. He was a man undeterred by the most fearful of encounters. The vicissitudes of not only civilized life, but nature itself were not enough to make this man fear. Courage has historically been associated with physical courage, but courage isn't limited to physical feats. It takes courage to stand up for your beliefs, even when it's unpopular. It takes courage to be vulnerable and open yourself up to ridicule. Theodore possessed both physical and mental courage. Courage is made perfect in not just forbearance, but humility. Humility is the ultimate mark of maturity. It is accepting the fact that you could be wrong and opening yourself up to other perspectives. It is acknowledging your limits, both physical and, in this case, a limit of perspective. Theodore displayed courage in authentically espousing what he believed, and humility in opening himself up to correction. This illuminates for us the quintessential example of manhood. And if you're enjoying this video so far, and you feel as though you're gaining something out of it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Virile competition. Competitions of competence have long been associated with masculinity. Men love to compete in arm wrestling, sports, video games, and much more. Competency and mastery in our craft is something we love. The psychologist Ellen Winner called this the rage to master, a consuming interest in what fascinates someone, often to the point of madness. Baki, the main character from his namesake, said that if one is born as a male, at least once in his life, he'll dream of being the strongest man alive. Eddie Hall, the previous strongest man in the world, said it's probably every man's alpha male dream to become the world's strongest man. I personally don't necessarily think this needs to be physical strength or martial arts, but the idea that we desire supreme competency in our preferred craft is still a universal truth. Theodore Roosevelt's brand of masculinity was deeply tied to the concept of virile competitions involving the highest degree of competence. Competition is the lifeblood of men, biologically speaking. Men with high testosterone are more likely to compete for higher status in the dominance hierarchy, whether that be physically in sports or financially in business and entrepreneurship. Evolutionary psychology suggests that competition is a passionate driver for men, but Roosevelt took this concept even further beyond, emphasizing not just winning, but the journey of self-improvement itself through competition. Competition wasn't just about winning or crushing your opponents. It was a driving force for personal expertise and a way to push yourself to greater heights for its own sake. Competition brings both parties to a higher level of competence than they otherwise would have been before the engagement, thus making it a necessity for those pursuing maximum self-actualization. We see this in how he loves activities like hunting and ranching. These pursuits weren't just about leisure, they honed his physical prowess, demanding strategic thinking and testing of his mettle. Competition wasn't just limited to the physical realm, though. Roosevelt was a fierce intellectual competitor, engaging in passionate debates on policy issues. His strenuous life philosophy also championed competition in the arena of ideas. urging us to strive for excellence in all aspects of life. We will discuss this more later, but as an introduction, Roosevelt's famous "Man in the Arena" speech perfectly embodies this view. He doesn't glorify victory at all costs. Instead, he emphasizes the importance of taking risks, entering the arena of competition, and striving for greatness even if you fail. The true mark of a man lies in the effort itself, and the competency that is born thereof. Finally, Roosevelt saw competition as a national ideal. He believed America should be a competitive force on the world stage. His big stick diplomacy exemplifies this view. Competition, in his eyes, was a way to maintain American power and influence in the global arena. By incorporating these aspects of competition, Roosevelt created a unique vision of masculinity. It was about pushing yourself to be better, engaging in fair competition, and striving for excellence in all aspects of life. Piety. People may object to piety being considered a principle of masculinity, but they are mistaken. Piety guides your morals, underscores latent dutiful proclivities, and augments self-discipline, honor, courage, and conviction. In fact, I would argue that one cannot attain the highest level of these virtues without possessing not just personal conviction, but also divine conviction. Piety reestablishes your very reason for living. Theodore Roosevelt's piety and religious convictions were woven into the fabric of his character, profoundly influencing both his public service and private life. As a member of the Dutch Reformed Church, his faith was grounded in a Protestant work ethic and a sense of moral duty. He believed that a strong work ethic, an indomitable character, and physical fitness were all intercorrelated, hence why he was a big advocate for muscular Christianity. He has said, "There is only a very circumscribed sphere of usefulness for a timid, good man." And, if we read the Bible aright, we read a book which teaches us to go forth and do the work of the Lord, to do the work of the Lord in the world as we find it, to try and make things better in this world, even if only a little better, because we have lived in it. That kind of work can be done only by a man who is neither a weakling nor a coward, by the man who is, in the fullest sense of the word, a true Christian. There's quite a bit more to be said about this, and I elaborate on that in my book, Muscular Christianity, A Case for Spiritual and Physical Fitness. The physical book is available, the digital book is available, and the audiobook is available. Read by yours truly. Link in the description. Greatness and discipline. One of Theodore Roosevelt's main philosophical ideas was what he called the strenuous life. A life of toil and effort in pursuit of greatness was the authentic way to live. And he didn't just believe it was those who had to work to survive who needed to live this life. He wanted it even for the rich and wealthy. The affluent don't find themselves driven by external forces compelling them to toil vigorously. Thus, they must internally instill that dogged determination. He believed that the will to fight and strive and conquer were necessary manly virtues. He believed that every man had a call to live a life of vitality, and that there was an unhealthy cult among the especially cultivated people to ignore that necessary calling. He said, "If you are rich and worth your salt, you will teach your sons that though they may have leisure, it is not to be spent in idleness. For wisely used leisure merely means that those who possess it, being free from the necessity of working for their livelihood, are all the more bound to carry some kind of non-remunerative work in science, in letters, in art, in exploration, and in historical research work of the type we most need in this country, the successful carrying out of which reflects most honor upon the nation. A man can be freed from the necessity of work only by the fact that he or his fathers before him have worked to good purpose. If the freedom thus purchased is used aright, and the man still does actual work, though of a different kind, he shows he deserves his good fortune. But if he treats this period of freedom from the need of actual labor As a period not of preparation, but of mere enjoyment, he shows that he is simply a cumbearer of the earth's surface, and he surely unfits himself to hold his own with his fellows if the need to do so should again arise. A mere life of ease is not in the end a very satisfactory life, and, above all, it is a life which ultimately unfits those who follow it for serious work in the world. And Theodore Roosevelt certainly embodied this philosophy. Despite coming from a family of what would now be considered millionaires due to inflation, Theodore was someone dedicated to extreme hard work and rugged tenacity. It is precisely because of his wealth and the awareness of his susceptibility to deviating from his philosophy that he made an even greater effort to embody it with unwavering vigor. Some of the stories about him, which I will further elaborate in this video, rival the stuff you see from people like Kobe Bryant and David Goggins. If David Goggins is the hardest man alive, Roosevelt was the hardest man of a now bygone generation. It is usually those who come from a bad background that end up being the most hardcore. Think, for example, Mike Tyson. But Teddy demonstrates that greatness is a choice. We can all realize our latent potential through sheer determination and relentless effort. Teddy's life stands as a testament to the idea that true grit and resilience are not bound by one's origins, but are a continuous choice, refined in the crucible of one's willpower and commitment to personal excellence. Living a strenuous life in and of itself is something we should all pursue. His other famous speech that parallels this well is his Man in the Arena speech. This speech underscores the necessity of pursuing greatness for its own sake and refining those virile qualities necessary for its pursuit, believing it is hard to fail, but it is even worse to have never tried to succeed. He says, "It is not the critic who counts, nor the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who, at the very best, knows, in the end, the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. It is infinitely more noble to venture into grand endeavors and win glorious triumphs, even if marred by repeated failure, than to align oneself with those desolate souls who neither revel in the great joys nor endure the significant sorrows, for they experience neither the great ecstasy of victory nor the painful agony of defeat. Despise the idea of leaving any what-ifs out there in the universe. Don't die with regrets, haunted by thoughts of, if only I tried X, or if only I gave my all in Y. Ecclesiastes 9:10 calls us to work and make the most of our lives, to seize every moment with unwavering resolve, for death puts an end to all our endeavors and extinguishes all our opportunities. So work where you are, with all your might, and see if you can make something of yourself. Marshal your strength, and strive relentlessly to forge a legacy worthy of remembrance. Despite all of his gritty resolve, he was also a man of great sympathy. He understood what it really means to be strong, and thus he didn't let that power corrupt him. When you understand what it takes to get somewhere, you have more grace for those in lower positions, so long as you allow yourself to be humbled by the pursuit. Roosevelt lost his first New York mayoral campaign, but then, as we all know, he eventually became the president. He knows what it's like to dare greatly and still fail, and he knows what it's like to reach the top of his career. Experiencing both success and failure helps you understand that neither is permanent, and that failures are often necessary for those who choose to blaze their trail, pursuing their ideals. With the right framework, you reject the dichotomy of winning or losing. In truth, you either win or you learn, and learning is winning, so you either win immediately or win eventually in a more roundabout fashion. This is what helped Roosevelt take joy in everything and work like a horse. As president, he was known to plow through mountains of state documents, memorize whole chunks of it, and leave his desk bare of even a single card by lunchtime. In the meantime, he matched wits with historians, zoologists, inventors, linguists, explorers, sociologists, actors, and statesmen, who daily crowded his table, bombarding Congress with book-length messages. Life is a continual progress of development, refining, winning, and learning from your losses. Physical strength. If you compare a St. Bernard dog, heavy and slow, with a Jack Russell Terrier, all bone and muscle in a small package of nervous activity, you can get a sense that the body and the behavior go together. The St. Bernard dog is not going to race around the house, yapping and perpetually chasing a ball, no matter how warm the temperature is, whereas the terrier can't help but do it. Or consider the differences between a raven and a hummingbird. The raven is long-lived, big, careful, and slow. It flaps about in loops, looking for small animals to snatch up or for carcasses that stay where they are. The hummingbird's heart races hundreds of beats per minute. The highest recorded has been 1,260 beats per minute, or 21 beats a second. So fast that the human ear cannot distinguish one beat from another. Then, as we expect, we see the behavior that corresponds with such a body. The thousands of miles that the hummingbirds travel. Their energetic hovering in midair, in the forced and strenuous place-holding. Their sudden movements like the shot of an arrow, or how the male dives 80 feet at 50 miles an hour to court a female. Similarly, every typical behavior of boys can be seen as a natural expression of the forms of their bodies. The boys have more muscle mass and a higher metabolism. Therefore, they crave action, and they grow restive and irritable without it, just as a border collie in an apartment would. The boys have muscles that are designed to grow stronger. Their potential for muscle growth is exponential. Think of football, or wrestling, or playing King of the Hill. Wherever you go in the world, you will find games which boys invented that stress the muscles and bruise the bones. It's ubiquitous, perhaps even universal. A boy who lifts weights is making tiny tears in his muscles, which actually builds his muscle mass. The needs of the body explain what is otherwise hard to understand philosophically, that it feels good not only to tackle your opponent on the open field, but even to be tackled, to come down with incredible force against the hard ground, and to get up and do the same thing over and over again. All of this is a circuitous way of saying the male body is designed to physically exert itself in combat, competition, and exercise. Engaging in this allows them to happily obey the imperatives of their nature, a form of physical mastery through blood, sweat, and grit. That is why so many of us find it admirable. Physical strength is not just aspirational in itself. Everyone can appreciate a well-built physique. It is also a symbol of physical mastery and mental strength. It represents someone who has trained their physical faculties through repeated work, and someone who, if needed, could defeat them in a test of physical mettle, and perform the tasks he's supposed to be relied on to keep society afloat. It's a reminder that beauty and optimal performance must be maintained through pain, effort, and dedication. It tells those looking at it that this is a man of patience, continuous effort, self-discipline, and proficiency. Theodore Roosevelt was by far the strongest president we've had. Young boys, including the boxer Gene Tunney, were known to try to emulate their hero's physique by doing chest exercises. Children would even punch his boorish chest whenever they got the chance to meet him. Theodore had an indefatigable passion for exercise. At the age of 14, he got beat up one day and vowed to never let that happen again. He then spent his time honing his skills as a pugilist. Upon becoming president, he broadened his scope and practiced jujitsu, wrestling, and judo, even inviting people into the White House to fight him. Yes, he could be on the street, see someone that looks tough, and say, "Hey, do you want to fight?" And if they said yes, he would take them to his office. The things people make up for Chuck Norris jokes, Roosevelt actually did. His voracious appetite for combat led him to, on one occasion at least, be observed wrestling a sumo wrestler. He was never a master martial artist or anything, but he did get his way up to a brown belt in judo and was documented as being a born fighter. He was 5'9" at 200 pounds, and while critics may argue that he looks a bit pungy nowadays, he was an undeniable force of brute strength. Just ask anyone unlucky enough to receive a blow from him. Professional boxers were the ones who said that Teddy was a born fighter who would repay their ferocious blows with interest, even if he lacked a bit in the skill department. Yes, Roosevelt fought professional boxers. When he won his second mayoral campaign for New York, I say again to really highlight the point, he would literally randomly challenge people who would look like they would be a tough boxing match. Eventually, he started tracking down professional boxers. He only stopped this practice because he went blind in his left eye after a particularly gutting punch to the face, irreparably dislodging his retina and neural connections. What's crazy is that he has a very small frame. He was noted to have very small hands and feet. This is because he was born with severe asthma, deafeningly severe at that. He had to be homeschooled his entire life because he couldn't afford not having immediate medical care with him throughout an entire day. When he was 17, he was a 5'9", 130-pound skinny kid. Here are the measurements if you're curious. That being said, if you know a lot about fitness, you would know that the size of your frame is of paramount import in the contest of looking as large and intimidating as possible. Theodore trained his body to such an extent that despite his petite frame, he was still able to look imposing. And of course not just look the part, but actually embody it. He overcame his asthma and weak, small frame with nothing but sheer, unwavering, indefatigable force of will. An example that also serves to underscore his commitment to leadership is a story from 1906. In 1906, he tried to institute a fitness test for the military. Upon his request, he received complaints from officers that the test was too strident. So, Teddy took the test himself and passed with flying colors. He was 48 at this time and dominated a test deemed too difficult for people half his age. As another testament to his unshakable will, Roosevelt was shot in the chest while campaigning in Milwaukee for a third presidential term under his newly created Progressive Party. The bullet pierced through a part of his glasses and a 50-page copy of his speech. Instead of going to the hospital like a sane, normal person would, he proceeded to give a 90-minute speech with a bullet still lodged in his chest. Thanks to his experience as an anatomist and a hunter, he figured that the bullet had not reached his lung and that he could wait to receive medical treatment. After losing his third-term bid, he set out on an expedition to South America to traverse what he called the River of Doubt. During his travels, he got injured and required surgery. He proceeded to get a ragtag, off-the-grid surgery and survived the procedure with no anesthetic, without even flinching. At 50 years of age, he had vigor and strength rare of someone half his age. Roosevelt was told at a young age that he should pursue a calm and soft life, looking to find a career behind a desk. He obviously didn't heed these words, but I'd wager that he probably ended up living longer because he chose to live this strenuous life. He died at 60, but given his issues as a child, most people didn't expect him to make it to 50. Charisma. Theodore Roosevelt possessed an irresistible and contagious laugh. He was known to regale others with jokes until they ached. His smile was so expressive that it seemed to jump right out of the pages of a cartoon. Noticing this, he was actually made into a cartoon by others, and they would make sure to emphasize those patented teeth. Theodore was undeniably quite the loquacious type. It is said that in a 2-hour dinner on a given day, his guests would be responsible for 4 minutes of talking, while he would fill the rest up himself. He is, fortunately, a superb orator, which definitely helped his lengthy monologues stay engaging. He had a voice that stings and sizzles. Although he doesn't swear, possessing a passionate disdain for such language, he can pack such venom into a word like swine that it has the force of an obscenity, making his victim feel incredibly swinish. Roosevelt has a particular gift for humorous invective, the ability to, at once, speak with gregariousness, while at the same time leach his words with rancor toxins. He exuded a force of effervescence and electricity, and the Roosevelt worship wasn't confined to the United States. In England, King Edward VII and ex-Prime Minister Balfour considered him to be, quote, the greatest moral force of the age. British journals ranked him on the same level as Washington and Lincoln. Even the august London Times, in a review of his latest very remarkable message to Congress, admits, "It is hard not to covet such a force of public life as our American cousins got in Mr. Roosevelt." France's ambassador of the United States, Jules Jusserand, says publicly that Mr. Roosevelt is the greatest man in the Western Hemisphere, head and shoulders above everyone else. And from Christiania, Norway, comes the ultimate accolade, an announcement that Theodore Roosevelt, world peacemaker, has become the first American to win the Nobel Prize. Ex-President Grover Cleveland, he himself being a man of legendary ability, calls Theodore Roosevelt the most perfectly equipped and most effective politician thus far seen in the presidency. Coming from a Democrat and longtime Roosevelt watcher, this praise shows admiration of one virtuoso for another. With his clicking efficiency and inhuman energy, the president seems not unlike a piece of engineering himself. Many observers are reminded of the high-speed locomotive. "I never knew a man with such a head of steam on," says William Sturgis Bigelow. "He never stops running, even while he stokes and fires," another acquaintance marvels, later on adding that Roosevelt presents a dazzling, even appalling spectacle of a human engine driven at full speed, the signals all properly set beforehand. And if they aren't, never mind. Henry James describes the engine as destined to be overstrained perhaps, but not as yet, truly betraying the last creak. It functions astonishingly and is quite exciting to see. And if you want some charisma for yourself, look into my merch store and see if anything interests you. I would really appreciate it. Kindness. Theodore Roosevelt was a staunch advocate for black integration during a time when social and legal segregation prevailed. He notably supported J.R. Lynch, a black congressman, to become chairman of a Republican convention. During his first campaign of mayor of New York, Roosevelt actively courted the black vote and engaged in numerous amicable meetings with African American communities. In his writings, he spoke highly of these interactions, saying that he had a, quote, magnificent meeting of colored people, and that he, quote, loves to speak to colored people. Despite facing criticism, Roosevelt remained undeterred and resolute in his support of racial equality. As president, he invited Booker T. Washington, a black education advisor, to dine with him at the White House. This marked the first time a black man was invited to the White House for dinner, and, as anticipated, the event was highly controversial at the time. Summing up his opinion on the matter, he states, "The only wise and honorable Christian thing to do is to treat each black man and each white man strictly on his merits as a man, giving him no more or less than he shows himself worthy to have." A key aspect of masculinity is fatherhood. Perhaps the key aspect of masculinity is fatherhood. Roosevelt loved nurturing children and had 6 of his own. all with disparate and successful careers. If I were to lob a criticism at Roosevelt, it is that he may not have raised his kids as well as he could have. Upon his death at the age of 60, a couple years after traversing the aforementioned River of Doubt, one of his children, Kermit Roosevelt, decided to violently put his life to an end around the same time his father, Theodore Roosevelt, passed away in his sleep. This is because he couldn't imagine moving on with life without his father. Theodore should have instilled a more durable identity in his children. I'd say he should have more thoroughly entrenched his child in the things above, beyond, and permanent, and not having his nucleus of meaning being derived from him. Ultimately, there isn't enough information on the way he parented for me to make any definitive statements. From the outside looking in, this is just what it appears like to me, but I may be wrong. Kermit, of his corrupted will, may have decided to do this against his father's parenting, but if not, that would be my criticism of him, again from the outside looking in. Intelligence. H.G. Wells said in a Harper's Weekly article that Roosevelt is as impressive mentally as he is physically. Quote, "His range of reading is amazing. He seems to be echoing with all the thought of the time. He has receptivity to the pitch of genius. He had a habit of inviting every eminent man within reach to his table, then proceeding to plug into the depths of their speciality." The vast majority of his interlocutors would agree with Wells that Theodore Roosevelt has, quote, "the most vigorous brain in a conspicuously responsible position in all the world. Its variety is protean." When the British Embassy's new counselor, Sir Esme Howard, mentioned a spell of diplomatic duty in Crete, in other words, spending a period of time serving in an official diplomatic capacity in the island of Crete, an island in Greece, Roosevelt immediately and learnedly began to discuss the archaeological digs at Knossos, a location on the aforementioned Crete. The president was also capable of declaiming German poetry to Lutheran preachers. Roosevelt was equally at home with experts in naval strategy, forestry, Greek drama, cow-punching, metaphysics, and football players. He was also a voracious reader, apparently reading a book every day even when he was busy, and is said to flip the pages 2 to 3 times a minute. Reading 3 pages per minute is very fast. The average reading speed for an adult is typically around 200 to 300 words per minute. Reading 3 pages per minute, which would mean reading approximately 750 to 900 words per minute, is exponentially above the average reading speed. The top reading percentages typically cap out around 500 to 700 words per minute. Therefore, reading 750 to 900 words per minute would likely place him well above the 99th percentile. This means he can read my book in about an hour and some change. On his less busy days, he would finish 3 to 4 books a day. When asked to summarize the book he read with ostensible haste, he will do so in minute detail, often quoting the text verbatim. His reading section was also eclectic, reading from the life of St. Patrick's, to Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, to German novels, to biological textbooks. He also had a photographic memory, able to remember people's faces after a cursory glance for months at a time. He subconsciously memorizes long quotes from literature he read years ago. Congress said it was used to challenge him in a contest of facts and figures. He also attended and graduated from Harvard, after which he became a punctual author, authoring many scientific articles, and his Naval War of 1812 is considered the definitive source by esteemed historians. His IQ is clearly in excess of 140, which is the beginning of the genius category. I would estimate that, at least in the matter of his verbal intelligence, his IQ is possibly in the 160s, putting his intellect into the exceptional genius category. Estimates around the web have his full-scale IQ estimated to be between 150 and 160. Chastity. Did Theodore allow this power and magnetism to corrupt him sexually, like so many other great men in history? No. He held staunchly to his Christian morality and had aggressive control over his sexual desires. He was chaste and would often use scandals of his political rivals to espouse his vehement distaste for sexual immorality. He found the idea of premarital sex to be an act of vulgarity and brutishness. Sex was part of the mystical union of marriage, an insuperable act of perfected love that can only be properly expressed in the indissoluble union of marriage. If he senses any sexual interest among someone who is not his wife, he will spurn it immediately. In matters of sexual morality, he is as prudish as they come. His small hands only caress 2 women, his 2 wives, one who we explained earlier tragically died early in his life. The young man was noted to be maddeningly immune to coercion and bribery. While walking home one night, his opponents tried to blackmail him with sex. On his way back, he was startled to see a woman slip and fall on the sidewalk in front of him. He called a cab, whereupon she tearfully begged him to accompany her home. But Teddy grew suspicious and refused. As he paid the cab driver, he took note of the address she gave and immediately afterward dispatched a police detective to her house. The report came back and there had been, quote, a whole lot of men waiting. Even his worst enemies called him a man of noble character, if nothing else. Roosevelt had even his sexual desire under the reign of his will. As a man, if you can control your sexual appetite, you can control almost anything. To govern one's sexual appetite is to assert domination over the most primal, base, and restless human urge. Mastery over one's sexuality is not just a personal virtue, but a testament to overall self-control. It serves as a crucible of a man's character and fortitude. It is a crucial test of a man's character and strength. All powerfully good things can be abused, and the better a thing is, the worse it becomes when it is corrupted. A bad dog is worse than a bad insect, and a bad man is worse than a bad dog. Roosevelt, in having the good of his sexual powers under control, despite his wealth, fame, power, and opportunities, underscores just what a great man Roosevelt was. Leadership. Theodore Roosevelt exemplified leadership through his gentle and fair handling of the Russo-Japan conflict. He was praised for displaying the kindness and tactfulness of a truly great man. Everything he did was traced with exemplary leadership. Roosevelt was not just a legislator fueled by an ineffable conviction. He was a man who, in every sense, was someone you wanted to follow. He practiced the same kind of conviction he legislated with, and approached life with the kind of virility whom any man with honest eyes would respect. Society talks about the dichotomy of leaders who lead by example and those who lead by direction. But Theodore was someone who led by both wise direction and vigorous example. A man who not only commanded, but in every respect made it clear he was not above his dictums and was fully willing to oblige by them. You see, leading only by example risks your intentions and directions going unnoticed, and leading only by direction risks people viewing you as distant and unapproachable, and in worst cases being seen as unfair and of poor moral character, and dictatorial. Theodore was a unique case wherein he benefited from leading by example and from leading by direction. He gave those who followed him clear direction and goals to strive for, and was one of the most qualified, both physically and morally, to carry them out. I will not be voicing my opinion on the policies he advocated for, nor will I give my approval or disapproval of his actual actions, as that's beyond the scope and frankly necessity of this video. But here are some things he did. Roosevelt was against leading in a way that could be construed as hypocritical. When the Spanish-American War was underway, Theodore led his Rough Riders up Kettle Hill, something orthodox military strategists deemed impossible. Namely, he stored and captured a higher redoubt, a redoubt being a temporary fortified defense structure used to protect soldiers and artillery, over an open ground using weapons inferior to, and fewer than, the Spanish forces who were securely ensconced and entrenched in Kettle Hill. The taunt towards politicians is that they are armchair and parlor jingos who wish to see others do the things they only advocate for. Theodore could not be said to be guilty of such an accusation. He was every bit as fiery, dynamic, and daring as the doctrines he preached. He didn't go into war recklessly, but with discernment, trepidation, and moderation of spiritual exhilaration. He knew that whatever good he might be able to do is limited insofar as the group is able to follow the lead of its head member. So he knew he needed to go out into war in order to fully justify his power. So do it he did, with expert skill at that, vindicating and augmenting his eminent position of leadership. This contrasts what is essentially the Sir Galahad theory of politics, which essentially boils down to, I will win because my heart is pure. Now, I agree that insofar as your personal security and assurance is concerned, yes, it is true that you will win because your heart is pure. But that is not how ideas are disseminated. That's not how culture at large is changed. And thus, that's not how to make the most of your position in leadership. In the realm of politics, you can be right and speak the truth, but if you don't have the power to properly disseminate that truth, your words effectively mean nothing. Theodore augments his power and uses it to promote as much goodness as he can, wherever he finds himself. Conclusion. This is a long one, so here are the key points of this video. Masculinity involves embodying virtues that are prevalent and natural among men. It involves using these traits for the greater good and contributing to human flourishing. Men should be strong and courageous, but also gentle and compassionate. It is through strength that compassion is given its full weight. Physical strength is usually undervalued, despite the fact that it is still important. Physical strength and power, when accompanied with virtues like humility, patience, and modesty, has the potential to be an incredible force for good. Be both resolute in your conviction and open to correction. Competition is a healthy part of life. It isn't just about winning, but about self-improvement and personal growth. Competition should be conducted with fairness and honor. Take risks and strive for greatness. Greatness and its pursuit are paramount. Work relentlessly, regardless of wealth and status. Christianity is essential to masculinity, guiding moral principles, duty, self-discipline, honor, courage, and conviction, with a divine conviction enhancing these virtues and re-establishing your purpose. Don't use your current state of weakness as a reason not to pursue strength. Do it and become the strongest version of yourself, surprising those who doubted you. Loyalty and chastity are the hardest tests for men. Learn to control it, and you can control almost anything else. The best leaders lead not just by competence, but by example. You should be able to adhere to everything you advocate for. Theodore Roosevelt embodied masculine virtues to the max degree. He was strong, both physically and mentally. He was courageous, standing up for what he believed in, even when it was unpopular. He was competitive, always striving to improve himself. And he was pious, finding meaning and purpose in his faith. Roosevelt was not without his flaws. He could be impulsive, aggressive, and he could be focused on other things more than his parenting. I'm not saying he was a perfect man, but his strengths far outweighed his weaknesses. He was a man of action, a man of character, and a man who inspired others to be their best selves, using his large platform to magnify his message. Whether you agree with Roosevelt's policies or political philosophy at large, there is no denying he was a fascinating and complex figure. He was a man who lived to the fullest, who left a lasting impact on the world. We need more men like Theodore Roosevelt. His message and ethos is more important now than it was when he was alive. We need men who are strong, both physically and mentally. Men who are courageous and stand up for what they believe in. Men who are competitive and always strive to improve themselves. And men who are pious and find meaning and purpose in their lives. Now that you know about Theodore Roosevelt's masculinity, you're gonna need to know about Walter White and how he corrupted his masculinity. You can click right there to view it.